On the afternoon of May the 25th of 2021 in Apprentice, Mississippi, a 49-year-old black man, Eric Lachey Boykin of Gulfport, was arrested and charged with armed robbery and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The hunt for Boykin involved several law enforcement agencies. Officers located Boykin in the woods about 600 yards from the bank he had allegedly held up. There were 4 white officers with dogs who posed for a photograph while surrounding Boykin, who had posed, smiling. When the picture emerged, the police force came under fire and was labeled as inhumane. A Twitter user criticized the officers and said that they had made the ordeal look like they are posing with a lion or deer they shot. Josie Duffy Rice, a U.S. criminal justice system reporter, tweeted that none of the people involved realize what a bad look this is, or they do know how it looks, and that's why they posted it. She described the action as very, very bad, regardless of the reason behind it. One person commented on Wright's tweets and said that the photo showed the need for police reform. According to WDAM, WLBT had questioned agencies about who the officers were and if it was routine procedure to take pictures in such a manner at the end of an arrest. Richard Browning, Apprentice police investigator, confirmed to the Daily Mail that the officers were not part of his department. Number 7. Shane Lee Brown. At 4:44 p.m. on January the 8th of 2020, 23-year-old Shane Lee Brown was pulled over by police officers in Henderson, Nevada for a headlight violation. After the 23-year-old provided his name and social security card, the officers looked up his record and identified him as Shane Neil Brown, a man who had been wanted for illegal possession of a firearm. Shane Lee told the officers, "I've never been arrested for weapons charges," and pleaded with police to double-check his identity. He was arrested and remained in custody at the Henderson Detention Center for 2 days. He was then transferred to the Clark County Detention Center and jailed for another 4 days, despite repeatedly telling officials he was not the Shane Brown they were looking for, according to a National Public Radio report. On January the 14th of 2020, a public defender told Judge Joe Hardy during a return warrant hearing that the wrong Shane Brown was incarcerated. There was a disparity in middle names, heights, ages, and races, as shown by records. Shane Lee Brown was a 23-year-old black man and 5 feet 7 inches tall, while Shane Neil Brown was a 49-year-old white man who stood at 5 foot 11 inches tall. Fox 13 reported. The wrongfully confined 23-year-old then filed a suit against Las Vegas area law enforcement agencies in January of 2022. CNN reported on July the 8th of 2022 that Shane Lee had won a settlement of $25,000 from the Henderson Police Department and $65,000 from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. In an interview, Shane Lee described his experience as a simple traffic violation that escalated into more or less a nightmare. Number 6. Kiara Green. On March 27th of 2018, 29-year-old Kiara Green was arrested in San Bernardino County, California, on charges related to the murder of 73-year-old Las Vegas man Gassem Aliascari. Kiara was extradited to Clark County, Nevada, where she remained incarcerated for 72 days. A special public defender subpoenaed more information from Las Vegas Metropolitan Police and discovered details about the true killer, Kiara Jean Green, who had a similar name and age to Kiara Green. According to a homicide lieutenant from the police department, he'd never seen anything like that in his career and said it is an extremely unique situation. On August the 7th of 2018, Kiara Jean was arrested by law enforcement. She confessed to the police department that she'd strangled Aliascari using a shirt, which resulted in him falling and hitting his head on the bathtub. On September the 27th of 2018, the real killer was indicted by a grand jury for the murder. At the time of the proceedings, police officers Fred Merrick and Laura Cody had testified that they had wrongfully arrested Kiara. On April the 28th of 2020, Kiara filed a lawsuit against the police department, alleging that they'd violated her rights. Number 5. Sean Paul Galjo, version 1. On the early morning of May the 22nd of 2013 in Cutoff, Louisiana, Robert Paul Choest, aged 31, mistook a man for an alligator lying on his grandparents' driveway near his home and shot him dead. The gunman was arrested and charged with second-degree murder of 41-year-old Sean Paul Galjo. On January the 29th of 2016, Choest was found guilty of second-degree murder and handed down the mandatory life sentence without parole. According to Huma Today, He appealed and said that the evidence at his trial was insufficient to support a guilty verdict because he was intoxicated at the time of the shooting and the state had failed to prove specific intent. At the trial, he testified that he'd been up for 3 days and had crystal methamphetamine, 5 rocks of crack cocaine, about 6 beers and several pain pills in his system before the shooting. When the judge had announced the verdict, he said that the accuracy of the gunshot was proof of intent. The First Circuit Court of Appeals denied Chuest's appeal. Number 4. Annette Fontana, Heather Hendricks, version 2. Midway through testimony in the second-degree murder case against Sean Paul Gallagher on March 21st of 2015 in Louisiana, State District Judge John LeBlanc declared mistrial and said that prosecutors had exercised poor judgment in their dealings with witnesses. 2 days before the mistrial was declared, there had been a hearing in which LaFourche Sheriff's Detective Robert Mason testified. The prosecutors, Annette Fontana and Heather Hendricks, then visited the crime scene together with Mason and the lead investigator of the case, Christian Egan, who at the time hadn't testified yet. According to Hendricks, they'd inspected the property from the road and the detectives provided security throughout the visit. The father of the defendant, whom the defense had planned to call as a witness, saw the prosecutors together with the detectives and began to yell at them. LeBlanc said that the situation was disrespectful to the jurors. He added, "It's about bad decision-making." After the jurors' deliberation, they told the state district judge that they were deadlocked in a 9-3 decision. In the state, at least 10 jurors must agree to convict someone of a charge. An hour later, the jury still hadn't reached a verdict, so LeBlanc declared a mistrial. Eventually, in 2016, Gallagher was put on trial a second time and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that was later also upheld on appeal. Number 3. London Metropolitan Police. In Forest Gate, East London, England, on March 22nd of 2018, the Metropolitan Police was criticized after a selfie of 2 officers at a murder scene had been posted on Twitter. The officers from Forest Gate North's Safer Neighborhoods team posed, put their heads together and pursed their lips for the photo in front of the Stratford Centre where 20-year-old Benjamin Piekney had been stabbed to death the night before. According to Mail Online, Piekney had stepped in to protect his friend during a heated confrontation. At the time, it was the 8th killing in the capital in the past week. One Twitter user remarked upon the misguidedness of taking a selfie by the crime scene, given the recent string of violent incidents, while another criticized the officers by writing that their primary goal should have been finding the perpetrator. The selfie was immediately taken down, after which a spokesman for the police office said, "We accept that the officers showed a lack of judgment and sensitivity in posting a selfie picture tweet from the scene of a serious crime, and we apologize for any offense caused." The officers were reportedly spoken to by their superiors and reminded of how to use social media responsibly. Number 2. Lauren Bonamo and Gabriel Ferris. 23-year-old French students Lauren Bonamo and Gabriel Ferris were discovered dead on the night of June the 29th of 2008. The bodies were found tied up with a combined 244 stab wounds in a rented flat in Stirling Gardens, southeast London. Almost a year later, the killers, 23-year-old Dano Sonex and 33-year-old Nigel Farmer, were found guilty and sentenced to 40 and 35 years respectively. The judge described the incident as one of the truly horrific murders in British criminal history. The Justice Secretary, Jack Straw, told members of Parliament that the killings were a result of the probation system's poor judgment and poor management, as well as the Metropolitan Police and Prison Service's errors. Straw said that he accepted full responsibility for the very serious failures and personally apologized to the families of the deceased. Stay tuned after number 1 if you're longing for more cases of people with poor judgment. We have When Dumb Bank Robbers Go Wrong lined up for you right after this. Number 1. Iowa Juror. On November the 13th of 2014, the Iowa Court of Appeals ordered a new trial for a man convicted of murder in 32-year-old Buddy Frisbee's death. More than 2 years prior, Tyler Webster, who was 33 at the time, shot his best friend Frisbee twice in the head. Later on, he confessed that he had done so because he believed that his best friend was forcing himself upon 22-year-old Shelby Hall. Hall was Frisbee's girlfriend at the time. She later testified that there wasn't an assault but rather a consensual matter. Webster was then found guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. Later on, the Court of Appeals overturned the conviction since it was tainted by a juror's undisclosed relationship with the Frisbee family. Prosecutors then appealed. According to the Washington Times, employees at the courthouse, where the unnamed female juror worked, told the judge that they were surprised that she'd been selected because of the relationship. It was then discovered that Frisbee's stepsister was a close friend of the juror's daughter. It was later found out that the mother of the victim, Eliza Bustle, had posted on Facebook, "Give me strength," and one of the jurors liked it during the proceedings. Days after the trial, Bustle wrote on Facebook that a first-degree murder conviction had been wanted by the family, to which the juror responded, "I wish you could have gotten murder in the first degree." The court disapproved of the juror's conduct. Ultimately, the justice said that the juror's actions had shown poor judgment but hadn't reached a level of misconduct or bias required to overturn the verdict against the killer. Number 8. John Mogan and Ashley Dubois. An Ohio couple were taken into police custody after uploading photos to their Facebook in which they posed with the money they'd just stolen from a bank. 28-year-old John Mogan and his girlfriend, Ashley Dubois, aged 24, carried out the robbery at the Savings Bank in Asheville on the morning of August the 24th of 2015. Dubois reportedly drove Mogan to the bank after using makeup to conceal his face and neck tattoos. He walked in wearing a black hoodie and handed one of the tellers a note demanding cash. Mogan then absconded on foot with the money in hand. A few days after the robbery had taken place, the couple posted a variety of photographs to their social media profiles in which they could be seen with bundles of cash in their hands and mouths. A non-profit organization called the Central Ohio Crime Stoppers reported the suspicious Facebook posts to local authorities, who'd been struggling to identify any suspects during their initial investigation. Upon looking into the couple's backgrounds, the authorities found that Mogan had previously faced jail time for an unrelated bank robbery and had only been released on probation a month prior to the Asheville incident. Both Mogan and Dubois were charged in connection to the crime, with the former facing an additional 3 years in prison. Number 7. Michael Harrell. A man unwittingly incriminated himself while committing a bank robbery by handing the teller a stick-up note with his personal information on it. The U.S. Bank in Cleveland, Ohio was robbed on July the 19th of 2019 by Michael Harrell, a 54-year-old man who was a regular customer at the branch. Harrell slid the note stating his nefarious intentions across the teller line. Upon reading it, the female bank employee realized that he'd accidentally written his demands on a slip of paper that also listed his name and home address. The robber had reused a note that he'd received from the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles earlier that same day. The teller gave Harrell the money he'd demanded and even addressed him by his name in the process of completing the transaction. The robber subsequently fled the scene, and the teller was able to use the personal information written on the back of the stick-up note to identify Harrell to the authorities. He was arrested soon afterwards and, in spite of the damning evidence, ultimately pled not guilty to the crime. Number 6. Siegfried K. A man responsible for an attempted heist in the city of Osnabrück was labeled Germany's dumbest bank robber by the tabloid newspaper Bild. The robber, identified only as Siegfried K, entered what he'd thought to be a bank in May of 2011. Siegfried would quickly discover that the building was occupied by a private physiotherapy practice and hadn't operated as a bank for 17 years. Siegfried grabbed a hostage while wielding a plastic toy gun and demanded $13,500 as ransom. Upon realizing he wasn't standing in a financial institution, he instead forced a bystander to withdraw approximately $500 from a nearby ATM and subsequently fled in a stolen car. Law enforcement officers were able to lift the man's fingerprints from the toy gun, which he'd left inside the vehicle after abandoning it. With his 22 previous criminal convictions taken into consideration, Siegfried was sentenced to 7 years behind bars for the robbery. Number 5. Daniel Rains. A 35-year-old man from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, proceeded to rob a bank after having already given the employees 2 types of identification documents. Daniel Rains walked into the Metro Bank branch on 2nd Street on January the 6th of 2019 and stated an intention of opening up an account. In the process of doing so, Rains handed the teller 2 separate forms of ID. As he filled out the various application forms necessary to open a bank account, he suddenly proclaimed that he'd made a mistake and that he was actually there to rob the bank. Raines pulled out a gun and demanded money from the tellers, but was only given a small amount of cash before fleeing the scene. During the course of his attempted getaway, Raines accidentally crashed his car into another vehicle. Later that day, he was arrested by state troopers on suspicion of drunk driving in connection to the vehicle collision. He was also charged for the bank robbery, after law enforcement officials confirmed his identity with the bank employees who'd handled his ID. Number 4. Hannah Sabato. On November the 28th of 2012, Hannah Sabato, aged 19, uploaded a video to YouTube in which she openly bragged about robbing a bank. The day before Sabato's video surfaced online, the Nebraska resident had gone to the Waco branch of Cornerstone Bank and made off with more than $6,000 while holding the employees at gunpoint. She fled the scene in a stolen car, which police would later find at Buckley Park in the city of Stromsburg. In the self-incriminating video she recorded after the robbery, Sabato recounted the crime she'd committed in great detail. The YouTube upload was titled Chick Bank Robber and featured Sabato's open admission to stealing a vehicle in York and conducting an armed robbery in Waco. The video, which also showed Sabato holding up thick stacks of cash, was set against the backdrop of music by the band Green Day. Sabato was arrested by police that same day and ultimately faced a prison sentence of 10 to 20 years. During her ensuing incarceration, she was found guilty of assaulting a guard and had 1 to 2 years added to her sentence. Number 3. Edna Flores. An armed bank robber who voluntarily gave the teller his state-issued ID was remanded into custody as he was in the midst of committing the crime. On January the 25th of 2021, Edna Flores, aged 34, walked into a PNC bank in the Humboldt Park section of Chicago with the intention of stealing $10,000. He wore a surgical mask, a dark-colored jacket, and a baseball cap beneath his hood as he approached the teller line and handed the bank employee a note. He had filled out a deposit slip for the amount of $10,000 and had reportedly written "No die packs" and "Armed" at the bottom of the ticket. The teller subsequently activated the bank's silent alarm and, in an attempt to stall the robber until the arrival of law enforcement, requested he fill out a withdrawal ticket. Flores was asked to show an ATM card and some form of identification, at which point he volunteered his temporary Illinois ID card. The ID not only featured his photograph but also listed his name and date of birth. Chicago police officers arrived at the bank about 12 minutes after Flores had entered the building. They positioned themselves behind the robber in line. He was arrested in front of the teller window and was subsequently charged with 1 count of bank robbery. Investigators discovered that Flores possessed an extensive criminal history, including more than a dozen past arrests and an array of criminal charges. Number 2. Luke Carroll and Anthony Prince. In March of 2005, after a pair of Australian friends had robbed a bank in Colorado, they immediately went to McDonald's to take pictures showing them with the stolen cash. 19-year-old Luke Carroll and Anthony Prince, aged 20, were in the United States on a working holiday and were staying at a luxury ski resort. They decided to rob the West Star Bank in Vail, a branch they frequented themselves. During the course of the robbery, they neglected to conceal their strong Australian accents and also forgot to take off the name tags that they were wearing as part of their work uniforms. They used emptied BB guns to make it appear as though they were armed. After bagging a total of $130,000, the two men used their ski passes to board a chairlift within minutes of the robbery. Carroll and Prince subsequently made their way to a McDonald's restaurant and posed for photographs with the money they'd stolen in hand. The pair were arrested a day later at Denver International Airport while attempting to purchase one-way tickets to Mexico. Both Carroll and Prince pleaded guilty to the crime, and they were imprisoned for 5 and 4 years respectively. Their failed robbery attempt was the subject of widespread mockery and ridicule, with media outlets dubbing the two friends Dumb and Dumber. Number 1. Orlando Henderson. A vault worker at a bank in Charlotte, North Carolina, incrementally stole $88,000 from his employer over the course of several months. He then incriminated himself by posting pictures with the stolen money on social media. In late April of 2019, Orlando Henderson, aged 29, was hired to oversee the cash vault at an undisclosed branch of Wells Fargo. Henderson reportedly took this new position as an opportunity to pocket cash from within the vault to which he was working in close proximity. He then forged the bank's ledger to mitigate the discrepancies created by his theft. Federal prosecutors reported that the bank employee had made unauthorized withdrawals of small sums amounting to only a few $100s at a time during the infancy of his scam. As time progressed, Henderson started increasing the volume and frequency of his thefts, secretly withdrawing thousands of dollars on a daily basis. According to his FBI indictment, he'd set his own personal one-day high for money stolen on July the 15th of 2019 when he swiped more than $13,000 from the bank vault. Henderson didn't refrain from flaunting his newfound wealth to his followers on social media. In a series of photographs posted to his Facebook and Instagram profiles, Henderson could be seen posing with a brand new white Mercedes-Benz that he just recently purchased. He made the $20,000 down payment for the luxury vehicle using a portion of the cash he had stolen. Henderson also posted pictures of himself holding enormous stacks of bills. As the FBI had begun investigating the missing cash, the posts were used to identify Henderson as the culprit of the massive theft. Following his arrest, Henderson faced various charges in relation to his crimes, the maximum penalty of which was 30 years in prison and $1 million fine. Thanks for watching. Would you rather run with the bulls in Pamplona or go on a Liver King diet for a month? Let us know in the comments section below.